A few comments before I begin the lecture. I hope it doesn't come off my time. First, I can't see everybody, so I don't know. Should I stand or?
You can stand. It's better.
Okay, so I will stand in that way. The second, I'd like to, actually the first, I'd like to thank Professor Tamer for this wonderful opportunity, this invitation. I also like to congratulate you on this wonderful, wonderful project. And I also wish you that it continues and be funding and speakers, and I certainly share in your aspiration. And the third comment is, as you've heard, I'm an expert in medieval Jewish philosophy. And so my talk will be focusing on medieval Jewish philosophy. More specifically, it will be focusing on the leading thinker in medieval Jewish philosophy, and that's Maimonides. And this is important because what I'm going to give you is not really prophecy in medieval, in Judaism. It's going to actually, as you will see from my talk, be something like maybe rejecting the notion of prophecy in Judaism and trying to substitute it with a different notion of prophecy. So with this, I will begin. In one of his earliest works, the commentary on the Mishnah, the great 12th century Jewish theologian and rabbinical leader Moses Maimonides formulates a catechism for Judaism. While mandatory beliefs that Jews must accept existed from the time of the Pentateuch onwards, till Maimonides, there was no real attempt to present a legally binding, organized list of Jewish beliefs that determined one's status as a Jew and the attainment of future reward as taught by Jewish tradition. To the present day, this catechism is accepted by most Jewish rabbinical authorities. The sixth of the 13 principles of Judaism listed by Maimonides is prophecy. I hope you all have a copy of the handout. The first 5 principles all focus on the nature of God and the obligation to worship God alone. That the belief that God communicates with human beings is considered to be a principle of faith, that the belief that God communicates with human beings is considered to be a principle of faith is hardly surprising. How can there be Judaism, or any religion for that matter, without the belief in a communication from the realm of the divine to the human realm, by means of which divine messages are transmitted to human beings, imparting to them hidden knowledge and directing them in their actions? The Pentateuch brings numerous instances of such communications, which take many different forms. At times, God speaks to the chosen human messenger directly, at other times, through a divine intermediary, that is to say, an angel. At times, God communicates the message to human beings by way of dreams. At other times, a divine spirit envelops the person, inspiring his words or actions. At Sinai, God is depicted as speaking to the entire nation. Most of the divine law, however, is treated in the Pentateuch as being transmitted by God to a chosen human messenger, Moses, and verified to the nation as a whole by the great miracles that took place through the intermediation of Moses. But Maimonides does not just bring a list of mandatory Jewish beliefs. He also explains each one of them. That is to say, he determines the proper manner to understand each belief. In light of all the examples of prophetic communications in the Jewish sacred literature, how Maimonides understands prophecy is not only surprising, it is nothing short of revolutionary in the context of Jewish tradition. He writes as follows, and this is in your handout. The sixth principle, prophecy. That is, one should know that there are human beings who possess a superior nature and great perfection. They prepare their souls till they receive the form of the intellect. The human intellect then conjoins with the active intellect. From it, that is to say, the active intellect, a noble emanation emanates upon them. These are the prophets, this is prophecy, and this is its essence. I have dealt with this principle at length, together with Maimonides' approach to prophecy in general, in my book that my introducer so graciously mentioned, Prophecy, The History of an Idea in Medieval Jewish Philosophy. On this occasion, I would like to stress some general points. Maimonides' explanation would appear to be unintelligible to the average Jew, even one who is well educated in Jewish sources. Form of the intellect, conjoins with the active intellect, are not concepts found in any of these sources. One would have to be familiar with medieval Aristotelian philosophy, particularly the philosophy of the great Islamic thinker Al-Farabi, to make any sense of what Maimonides is talking about. And all this in explaining a principle that Maimonides regards as incumbent upon all Jews to accept. No less surprising is what is absent from this principle. There is no mention of God at all. Moreover, there is not even a mention of prophecy as consisting of concrete communications or messages to the individual, or of the individual being chosen for that matter. Instead, Maimonides talks of a noble emanation and stresses the preparedness of the person's soul to receive it. What is going on here? All the elements one would expect to find in a traditional description of prophecy are absent, to be substituted by enigmatic elements that very few of his readers would be capable of comprehending. The simple answer is that Maimonides is attempting to replace a traditional understanding of a cardinal Jewish belief with a philosophic medieval Aristotelian understanding of this belief. This is not only true of the belief in prophecy, but also in the belief of the nature of God. The underlying question Maimonides struggles with is whether one can continue to believe that God communicates with human beings without God having any direct contact with human beings, or not being directly involved in formulating the actual communication. Rather, God's role is that of the Aristotelian unmoved mover, or perhaps more accurately, of Plotinus's first cause of all that occurs in the world, but not the immediate cause of anything that occurs. In choosing to formulate the sixth principle in the manner he does, Maimonides' response is clearly in the affirmative. Prophecy is a natural phenomenon, with God's involvement being similar to how God is involved in all other natural phenomena. This point, it should be stressed, has major ramifications for all subsequent Jewish thought to the present day. To be sure, Maimonides appears to temper this point in the formulation of the seventh and eighth principles of the faith that deal with the unique prophecy of Moses and the heavenly origin of the divine law contained in the Pentateuch. This is also found in your handout, but I will not be reading these principles. In these instances, God appears to be directly involved. God communicates to Moses without any intermediary and imparts to him all the commandments. I, following a number of other scholars, have argued that Maimonides both here and elsewhere hints to an esoteric view on the subject, one that does not violate an Aristotelian naturalistic worldview, but still allows for the unique status of these phenomena that are fundamental to one's belief in the divinity of the law of Moses. For Maimonides, according to my interpretation, Moses attained the highest level of human perfection and conjunction with the transcendent active intellect possible for a human being, surpassing that attained by all previous and subsequent prophets. As a result, he alone was capable of formulating a law that deserves the epithet divine. Those familiar with the philosophy of Al-Farabi can appreciate his influence on Maimonides' thought on this issue, despite the important differences between them. But let us leave aside any further discussion of Maimonides on this point and limit ourselves to his views on prophecy in general. Maimonides returns to deal with prophecy in the first section of his Code of Jewish Law, Mishneh Torah, a section he names the laws of the principles of the Torah. His approach there largely echoes the one he formulated in his earlier sixth principle of Jewish faith. He essentially conflates two approaches to the phenomenon of prophecy. The first one is the one that focuses on prophecy as the product of a perfect intellect, viewing it primarily as a type of intellectual illumination that enables the person to comprehend all that exists in the world in a far more comprehensive and penetrating manner than possible by ordinary intellection. This state results from the intellect acquiring all theoretical knowledge in a discursive manner, culminating in knowledge of incorporeal existence. It thereby attains what Al-Farabi calls the acquired intellect, and what Maimonides terms the form of the intellect, and then conjoins with the lowest of the incorporeal existence, the active intellect. In short, prophecy is seen as a phenomenon involving the intellect and its attainment of pure theoretical knowledge in a manner closed to non-prophetic intellects. To explain the dreams and visions of prophecy of the prophets, however, Maimonides, again following Al-Farabi, focuses on the function of a perfect imagination in attaining prophecy. He also alludes to another form of knowledge attained by the prophet, apparently in large measure due to the imagination, namely knowledge of the future. In his great theological work, God of the Perplexed, Maimonides focuses on the place of the two human faculties, the rational and the imaginative, in regard to this phenomenon. He writes, and this is on your handout, "Know that the true reality and quiddity of prophecy consists in it being an emanation emanating from God. May he be cherished and honored through the intermediation of the active intellect toward the rational faculty in the first place, and hereafter toward the imaginative faculty. This is the highest degree of man and the ultimate term of perfection that can exist for his species. And this state is the ultimate term of perfection for the imaginative faculty." While the notions of the acquired intellect and conjunction are absent from his description, it is still compatible, for the most part, with his previous descriptions. To attain prophecy, Maimonides goes on to indicate, a person must have a perfect disposition, including a perfect imagination, and work to perfect one's rational faculty by acquiring all theoretical knowledge. Prophecy itself is described in terms of emanation, involving theoretical knowledge, knowledge of the future, and the ability to govern. Here, too, Maimonides does not speak of the reception of a concrete message. The rational faculty appears to be responsible for understanding the theoretical truths the prophet learns, while the imagination is responsible for the form prophecy takes, that depicts these truths in the form of metaphors, as well as the prophet's ability to divine the future and to determine the concrete course of action that an individual or the nation should embark upon. While in the guide, God appears to have returned to the story of prophecy by being treated as the source of the prophetic emanation, in this case, too, I would maintain that Maimonides is simply hinting here that God is the source of prophecy in the same way that God is the source of everything in the world, namely, as the first cause and the beginning of all emanation. Only the non-adept reader of the guide would interpret him to mean that from God emanates a particular message addressed to a particular recipient via a heavenly messenger. In other words, this reader would continue to try to interpret Maimonides as maintaining the view of a personal God who continues to interact with individuals and determine particular temporal events. The adept reader would understand that God's activity is a completely impersonal one and confined to being the first cause, whose sole activity is to maintain the order of existence in an unchanging manner. The emanation is a completely impersonal one of forces that are received by human beings and all other existence in accord with their preparedness. It is the prophet's soul that produces the particularity of the message that he attains. In other words, the particular message is the product of the soul while in this special state. The distinction Maimonides goes on to draw between private prophecy and public prophecy, that is, prophecy that involves a mission to others in the name of God, is hinted by him as also a result of the state of the prophet's soul in the reception of the prophetic emanation. In the case of some prophets, they feel an overwhelming internal compulsion to bring the knowledge they have learned in the state of prophecy to others in order to direct their actions. And this is the prophetic mission. This is what they mean when they say, that is, the prophets mean when they say that God has spoken to them and ordered them to inform the people such and such. In short, prophecy, whether public or private, is a completely naturalistic phenomenon. It is certainly true that Maimonides introduces elements in his discussion of prophecy that the not-so-careful reader would latch on upon to conclude that Maimonides does not embrace a naturalistic approach completely, and not only in regard to Mosaic prophecy and the revelation at Sinai. Rather, Maimonides continues to leave room for God's immediate volitional activity in the bestowal of prophecy. In the introduction to his discussion of prophecy in the guide, Maimonides appears to strike a middle course between the traditional view of prophecy as a personal initiative of God and the philosophic view of prophecy as a completely naturalistic attainment. Before he even begins to indicate what is prophecy, he outlines three different opinions regarding this phenomenon in Guide 232. The first opinion is that, and I quote, God chooses whom he wishes from among men, turns him into a prophet, and sends him with a mission, end quote. No fixed criteria for prophecy are posited by the adherents of this position, according to Maimonides. He ascribes this opinion to the ignorant pagans who believe in prophecy and to some of the Jewish masses. Against this opinion of prophecy, he presents as a second opinion that of the philosophers. Prophecy is a type of perfection. It requires the proper potential as well as the proper training to actualize the potential. Only the individual who has achieved perfection in the rational and moral virtues and possesses a perfect imagination can become a prophet. Furthermore, an individual of this description necessarily becomes a prophet. God, it should be noted, is not mentioned in Maimonides' formulation of this opinion. The third opinion is identified by Maimonides as the opinion of the divine law. It is, according to Maimonides, in agreement with the opinion of the philosophers with one crucial proviso. One who possesses all the requisite preparations for prophecy may still fail to become a prophet due to an act of divine will. And it should be noted, not vice versa. One lacking these preparations will never become a prophet, Maimonides insists. This, namely the negation of prophecy, is similar to the occurrence of any miracle in Maimonides' view. The naturalism of the philosophers' approach to prophecy is upheld according to this opinion, while the necessity characterizing their approach is negated. God acts primarily through the order of nature, but can also perform willful acts independent of the order. I will not bring all the reasons, many are already brought by some of Maimonides' medieval commentators, why he did not take the proviso he introduces to the philosophic approach seriously. That is to say, he did not really believe that God at times personally intervenes to deprive a person worthy of prophecy of this gift. Why he introduces this proviso is certainly clear, given the fact that he is writing his treatise for Jews who are committed to Jewish tradition, and hence he must ascribe to God some personal involvement involving this phenomenon. More interesting in my mind is the manner he characterizes the first opinion, one that belongs to pagans and some of the Jewish masses. That is to say, it belongs to the ignorant. Maimonides is well aware that this is the opinion of all the Jewish rabbinical authorities before him, and not just some of the ignorant masses. It is even the opinion of the pioneering medieval Jewish theologian and the leading rabbinical authority in the middle of the 10th century, Rabbi Saadia Gaon. Rather than being a minority opinion among the Jews, this is the opinion of prophecy shared by almost all Jews, the masses and the elite alike. There is a strong rhetorical, or perhaps I should say polemical, element in Maimonides' discussion here. The universal Jewish approach to prophecy prior to his time is dismissed by him as a non-Jewish approach maintained only by some ignorant Jews. While Maimonides understands that he cannot eliminate God's immediate role completely given his audience, he still goes to great lengths to replace their supernatural approach to prophecy with a naturalistic one, and go so far to equate it with the traditional approach. Maimonides is not the first thinker to introduce a more naturalistic approach to prophecy. There were a number of Spanish Jewish thinkers who preceded him. For example, Abraham ibn Ezra and Abraham ibn Daud, too, were heavily influenced by Islamic philosophic approaches to revelation in their understanding of prophecy. This is true also of Judah Halevi to a large degree. Yet no one came close to Maimonides' approach in either its overt naturalism or in its influence on the Jewish world. By treating prophecy for the most part, if not completely, in naturalistic terms, Maimonides' approach lessened what was seen as a giant, if not unbridgeable abyss, between the philosophic worldview and Jewish tradition. It is clear that Maimonides was intellectually drawn to Aristotelian philosophy as developed by the Islamic philosophers prior to Averroes. He strove to understand Judaism as much as possible in accord with their worldview. Prophecy is one of the subjects in which the tendency to understand Judaism as a philosophic religion is made evident. He is cognizant of the fact that the faith of the vast majority of his audience is dependent upon the view of the supernatural activity of God. But even exoterically, he seeks to lessen their dependence on this view and to appreciate much more God's wisdom and ability in working through the order of nature of which God is the cause. Maimonides' approach to prophecy has an additional crucial dimension that was shared by many Jews with far different approaches than his. It opened the possibility of achieving a prophetic experience in the present, rather than viewing it as a phenomenon of the past that would only be renewed in a messianic future. Maimonides was well aware of the rabbinic view on this matter, seeing in the early Second Temple period the end of the era of prophecy. But his view of prophecy as not only a natural phenomenon, but also as the ultimate perfection of the individual, transformed it into the object of human striving for those seeking the final goal of life. In the guide, Maimonides himself refers to prophetic-like experiences that he had attained. While Maimonides' philosophic followers did not explicitly speak of the quest to attain prophecy, they did discuss the possibility of attaining conjunction with the active intellect, which essentially amounts to the same thing. Maimonides' great Kabbalistic disciple, Abraham Abulafia, developed his Kabbalistic approach explicitly with the pursuit of prophecy at the center of it. Maimonides' immense influence on subsequent Jewish philosophic as well as Kabbalistic thought can hardly be overestimated. This pertains not only to the subject of prophecy, but to all theological issues, beginning with the nature of God. No medieval Jewish thinker could ignore Maimonides in developing his own approach. Among those who viewed Maimonides as their guide par excellence, there were those who picked up on his esoteric hints and viewed prophecy as a completely naturalistic phenomenon. This was particularly true of many of the Provençal thinkers, such as Joseph Caspe, Nissim Marseille, and Moses Narboni. Many, however, took Maimonides at his word in regard to the miraculous element of prophecy. That is to say, God's intervention in depriving prophecy from one who is prepared to receive it. Even in this case, one wonders whether some of these thinkers at least presented this position for the same reason that Maimonides introduced it, namely, to maintain some type of immediate connection between God and the individual, which was for most Jews central to their religious faith. Yet one should not overlook the fact that most thinkers after Maimonides were prepared to accept the notion that there was at least a strong naturalistic element in prophecy. And even those who did not accept this view still did not see it as heretical. Moreover, the striving on the part of many to attain a prophetic type of experience, namely conjunction with the higher realms, the illumination of the intellect, and ecstasy, became more pronounced after Maimonides. Certainly, Maimonides is not the only factor, and perhaps not even the dominant one, responsible for this trend. The influence of Islamic mystic movements on Jewish thought, even prior to Maimonides, as seen by the thought of two other Spanish Jewish thinkers, Bachya ibn Pakuda and Judah Halevi, certainly contributed a lot to this development, as did the nascent Kabbalah that developed in Provence in the same period. Yet the support that Maimonides gave to these trends, namely the naturalizing of prophecy and making it the goal of one's existential quest, was critical, given his role as one of the all-time leading rabbinical authorities who went so far as to incorporate this approach in his definitive code of Jewish law, the Mishneh Torah. I don't think it would be an exaggeration to divide Jewish thought, certainly medieval Jewish thought, into two periods, pre-Maimonidean and post-Maimonides, with prophecy being one of the fundamental topics in which the difference between the two periods can be detected. There were certainly many who rejected Maimonides' approach, some even belonging to the philosophic camp. There were those who rejected it for philosophic reasons and sought to develop an alternative naturalistic approach that would overcome what they saw as the difficulties in Maimonides' approach. This is true of the great early 14th century Provençal Jewish philosopher Gersonides. Basically, Gersonides, in his magnum opus, The Wars of the Lord, tried to develop a naturalistic model of prophecy in which the active intellect imparts detailed particular knowledge to the one who is prepared to receive it, while it's having no knowledge of the actual recipients of the information it imparts. Unfortunately, I have no time to enter into discussion of his thought on this issue, and this discussion of his thinking on prophecy is found on the book that I mentioned before. There were also those who attacked Maimonides for religious reasons, namely his essentially removing God from the picture in regard to the prophetic message. Some of them went so far as to develop a philosophic model that would return God to center stage and reestablish a direct relation between God and the individual. I am thinking primarily of the great Jewish theologian, Spanish Jewish theologian and rabbinic leader at the turn of the 14th century, Rabbi Chasdai Crescas. In his Light of the Lord, a treatise which appears to have subsequently influenced Spinoza, as did Maimonides' Guide of the Perplexed, Crescas defines prophecy as follows, and this is also in your handout. Prophecy is a spiritual emanation of knowledge. It emanates from God to the intellect of the person, with or without an intermediary. It informs him, even without his possessing the necessary premises, of a certain matter or matters of which he is ignorant. It extends to all subjects. Its purpose is to guide him or others properly. Crescas goes on to explain at length each of the elements of his definition. It is a definition that is completely at odds with the one presented by Maimonides. in that it describes to God the role of being the direct and immediate agent of each particular prophetic communication. Yet, even without going into details, one can still detect the great impact Maimonides had on Crescas' thought in this matter. It was Maimonides' approach that Crescas grappled with in developing his own. Though it was the religious shortcomings of Maimonides' approach that most disturbed Crescas, as a philosopher, it was crucial for him to show the philosophic problems in Maimonides' approach. Yet, as becomes clear from his subsequent discussion, Crescas does not completely remove the naturalistic element from prophecy. One must still have all the necessary qualifications, moral and intellectual, which also necessitate having the proper natural disposition in order to attain the gift from God. In conclusion, the Islamic Aristotelian Neoplatonic thought from which Maimonides drew in developing his approach to prophecy, as well as his approach to many other topics central to Judaism, may have passed on from the philosophic world, though this thought continues to thrive in modern mystical movements, whether Jewish, Islamic, or Christian. Yet despite the fate of the philosophic underpinnings of Maimonides' approach, it still leaves open a very real and current challenge for Jews, and I would say for those of other religions as well. Can one believe in a transcendent God who is the God of nature and who has no cognizance of the individual human being, nor communicates particular messages to him, in short, who is not the miracle-working deity of Jewish tradition, yet at the same time, one can still believe in the truth of the special nature or divinity of Jewish law and the praxis it lays down? Can one believe that the phenomenon of prophecy, resulting in the experience of illumination of the intellect, is nonetheless divine if it is a natural one, and that it should remain the ultimate goal of human striving and of a way of reaching the divine, or a reality, or reaching a reality that transcends our physical reality? Or another example of the challenge Maimonides' philosophy leaves us, certainly when interpreted along esoteric lines, is whether one in good faith can pray to a deity who one is convinced does not hear one's prayers, yet still regard these prayers as having a great positive impact on one's life. Or does only the belief in a miracle-working deity who is cognizant of the individual and can act directly in history provide a basis for faith in the efficacy of prayer? A similar dilemma confronts the believer in individual providence, still another principle of Judaism. Does one need to believe in a personal, all-knowing deity to believe in individual providence? Or can this providence be explained as a natural attainment of the individual, such as the attainment of knowledge, which enables one to avoid impending evils? It is this challenge of Maimonides' naturalistic approach that sees God's activity vis-a-vis human beings as an impersonal one, as opposed to the prevalent supernaturalistic approach in Judaism and other revelatory religions that sees this activity as a personal one, that makes Maimonides' approach of such contemporary interest, even if philosophy itself has moved on to other models of making sense of how we think of the world. Thank you.